All right, Bobby, you are up.
All right, here we go. We are going to be reading Pippi Longstocking. Okay, and here is sort of a funny, cartoonish picture of Pippi. All right, and her companion, Mr. Nelson. Pippi moves into Villa Vilcula. Way out at the end of a tiny little town was an old, overgrown garden, and in the garden was an old house, and in the house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there all alone. She had no mother or no father, and that was, of course, very nice, because there was no one to tell her to go to bed, just when she was having the most fun, and no one who could make her take cod liver oil when she much preferred caramel candy. Once upon a time, Pippi had had a father of whom she was extremely fond. Naturally, she had had a mother too, but that was so long ago that Pippi didn't remember her at all. Her mother had died when Pippi was just a tiny baby and lay in a cradle and howled so that nobody could go anywhere near her. Pippi was sure that her mother was now in heaven, watching her little girl through a peephole in the sky. And Pippi often waved up to her and called, "Don't you worry about me. I always come out on top." Pippi had not forgotten her father. He was a sea captain who sailed on the great ocean, and Pippi had sailed with him in his ship until one day her father was blown overboard in a storm and disappeared. But Pippi was absolutely certain he would come back. She would never believe that he had drowned. She was sure he had floated until he landed on an island inhabited by camels. And she thought he had become the king of all the cannibals and went around with a golden crown on his head all day long. My papa is a cannibal king, and it certainly isn't every child who has such a stylish papa, Pippi used to say with satisfaction. And as soon as my papa has built himself a boat, he will come and get me, and I will be a cannibal princess. Hi ho! Won't that be exciting? Her father had brought the old house and a garden many years ago. He thought he would live there with Pippi when he grew old and couldn't sail the seas any longer. And then this annoying thing had to happen, that he was blown into the ocean. While Pippi was waiting for him to come back, she went straight home to Villa Vicula. That was the name of her house. It had stood there ready and waiting for her. One lovely summer evening, she had said goodbye to all the sailors on her father's boat. They were all fond of Pippi, and she of them. "So long, boys," she said, and kissed each one on the forehead. "Don't you worry about me. I always come out on top." Two things she took with her from the ship: a little monkey whose name was Mr. Nelson. He was a present from her father, and a big suitcase full of gold pieces. The sailors stood upon the deck and watched as long as they could see her. She walked straight ahead without looking back at all, with Mr. Nelson on her shoulder and her suitcase in her hand. "A remarkable child," said one of the sailors as Pippi disappeared into the distance. He was right. Pippi was indeed a remarkable child. The most remarkable thing about her was that she was so strong. She was so very strong that in the whole wide world, there was not a single police officer as strong as she. Why, she could lift a whole horse if she wanted to, and she wanted to. She had a horse of her own that she had brought with one of her many gold pieces the day she came home. She had always longed for a horse, and now here he was living on the porch. When Pippi wanted to drink her afternoon coffee there, she simply lifted him down into the garden. Besides the Villa Vicella was another garden and another house. In that house lived a father and a mother and two charming children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Tommy and the girl's name Annika. They were good, well brought up, and obedient children. Tommy would never think of biting his nails, and he always did exactly what his mother told him to. Annika never fussed when she didn't get her own way, and she always looked pretty in her little well-ironed cotton dresses. She took the greatest care not to get them dirty. Tommy and Annika played nicely with each other in their garden, but they had often wished for a playmate. While Pippi was still sailing on the ocean with her father, they often used to hang over the fence and say to each other, "Isn't it silly that nobody ever moves into that house? Somebody ought to live there, somebody with children." On that lovely summer day when Pippi for the first time stepped over the threshold of Villa Vicola, Tommy and Annika were not at home. They had gone to visit their grandmother for a week, so they had no idea that anybody had moved into the house next door. On the first day after they came home again, they stood by the gate, looking out into the street, and even then they didn't know there was actually a playmate so close. Just as they were standing there considering what they should do and wondering whether anything exciting was likely to happen, or whether it was going to be one of those dull days when they couldn't think of anything to play, just then the gate of Villa Vicola opened and a little girl stepped out. She was the most remarkable girl Tommy and Annika had ever seen. She was Miss Pippi Longstocking out for her morning walk. This is the way she looked. Her hair, the color of a carrot, was braided in two bright braids that stuck straight out. Her nose was the shape of a very small potato and was dotted all over with freckles. It must be admitted that the mouth under this nose was a very wide one with strong white teeth. Her dress was rather unusual. Pippi herself had made it. She had meant it to be blue, but there wasn't quite enough blue cloth, so Pippi had sewed little red pieces on it here and there. On her long, thin legs, she wore a pair of long stockings, one brown and the other black, and she had on a pair of black shoes that were exactly twice as long as her feet. These shoes her father had bought for her in South America, so that Pippi would have something to grow into, and she never wanted to wear any others. But the thing that made Tommy and Annika open their eyes widest of all was the monkey sitting on the strange girl's shoulder. It was a little monkey dressed in blue pants, yellow jacket, and a white straw hat. Pippi walked along the street with one foot on the sidewalk and the other in the gutter. Tommy and Annika watched as long as they could see her. In a little while, she came back, and now she was walking backwards. That was because she didn't want to turn around to get home. When she reached Tommy and Annika's gate, she stopped. The children looked at each other in silence. At last, Tommy spoke. Why did you walk backwards? Why did I walk backwards, said Pippi. Isn't this a free country? Can a person walk any way she wants to? For that matter, let me tell you that in Egypt, everybody walks that way, and no one thinks it's the least bit strange. How do you know? Asked Tommy. You've never been to Egypt, have you? I've never been to Egypt. Indeed, I have. That's one thing you can be sure of. I have been all over the world and seen many things stranger than people walking backwards. I wonder what you would have said if I'd come along walking on my hands the way they do in the furthest India. Ah, now you must be lying, said Tommy. Pippi thought for a moment. You're right, she said sadly. I am lying. It's wicked to lie, said Annika, who had at last gathered up enough courage to speak. Yes, it is very wicked to lie, said Pippi, even more sadly. But I forget it now and then. And how can you expect a little child whose mother is an angel and whose father is the king of Cannibal Island and who herself has sailed on the ocean all of her life? How can you expect her to tell the truth always? And for that matter, she continued, her whole freckled face lighting up, let me tell you that in the Congo, there is not a single person who tells the truth. They lie all day long, beginning at 7 in the morning and keep on until sundown. So if I should happen to lie now and then, you must try to excuse me and to remember that it is only because I stayed in the Congo a little too long. We can be friends anyway, can't we? Oh, sure, said Tommy, and realized suddenly that this was not going to be one of those dull days. Oh, well, by the way, why couldn't you come and have breakfast with me? Asked Pippi. Why not, said Tommy. Come on, let's go. Oh, yes, let's, said Annika. But first, I must introduce you to Mr. Nelson, said Pippi, and the little monkey took off his cap and bowed politely. Then they all went in through the Villa Velka's tumble-down garden gate, along the gravel path, bordered with old moss-covered trees, really good climbing trees they seemed to be, up to the house and into the porch. There stood the horse, munching oats out of a cereal bowl. Why do you have a horse on the porch? Asked Tommy. All horses he knew lived in stables. Well, said Pippi thoughtfully, he'd be in the way in the kitchen, and he doesn't like the parlor. Tommy and Annika patted the horse and then went on into the house. It had a kitchen, a parlor, and a bedroom. But it certainly looked as if Pippi had forgotten to do her Friday cleaning. Tommy and Annika looked around cautiously, just in case the king of the cannibal isles might be sitting in a corner somewhere. They had never seen a cannibal king in all their lives, but there was no father to be seen, nor any mother either. Annika said anxiously, "Do you live here all alone?" "Of course not," said Pippi. "Mr. Nilsson and the horse live here too." "Oh, but I mean, don't you have any mother or father here?" "Oh, not in the least little tiny bit of one," said Pippi happily. "But who tells you when to go to bed at night and things like that?" asked Annika. "I tell myself," said Pippi. "First, I tell myself in a nice, friendly way. And then, if I don't mind, I tell myself again more sharply. And if I still don't mind, then I'm in for a spanking. See?" Tommy and Annika didn't see it all, but they thought maybe it was a good way. Meanwhile, they come into the kitchen and Pippi cried, "Now we're going to make a pancake. Now there's going to be a panicky. Now we're going to fry a pancake." And then she took 3 eggs and threw them up in the air. One fell down on her head and broke so that the yolk ran into her eyes. But the others she caught skillfully in a bowl where they smashed to pieces. And there she is. "I always did hear that egg yolk was good for the hair," said Pippi, wiping her eyes. "You wait and see. Mine will soon begin to grow so fast it will crack up. As a matter of fact, in Brazil, all the people go around with eggs in their hair, and there are no bald-headed people. Only once was there a man who was so foolish that he ate his eggs instead of rubbing them in his hair. He became completely bald. And when he showed himself on the street, there was such a riot that the police were called out." While she was speaking, Pippi had neatly picked the eggshells out of the bowl with her fingers. And now she took a bath brush that hung on the wall and began to beat the pancake batter so hard that it splashed all over the walls. At last she poured what was left into a griddle that stood on the stove. When the pancake was brown on one side, she tossed it halfway to the ceiling so that it turned right around in the air, and then she caught it on the griddle again. And when it was ready, she threw it straight across the kitchen, right into the plate that stood on the table. "Eat," she cried, "before it gets cold." And Tommy and Annika ate and thought it was a very good pancake. Afterwards, Pippi invited them to step into the parlor. There was only one piece of furniture in there. It was a huge chest with many tiny drawers. Pippi opened the drawers and showed Tommy and Annika all the treasures she kept there. There were wonderful birds' eggs, strange shells and stones, pretty little boxes, lovely silver mirrors, pearl necklaces, and many other things that Pippi and her father had brought on their journeys around the world. Pippi gave each of her new playmates a little gift to remember her by. Tommy got a dagger with a shimmering mother of pearl handle, and Annika a little box with a cover decorated with pink shells. And in the box there was a ring with a green stone. "Suppose you go home now," said Pippi, "so you can come back tomorrow. Because if you don't go home, you can't come back, and that would be a shame." Tommy and Annika agreed it would be indeed. So they went home, past the horse who had now eaten up all the oats, and out through the gate of Villa Vicola. Mr. Nelson waved his hat at them as they left. Chapter 2, Pippi is a thing finder and gets into a fight. Annika woke up early the next morning. She jumped out of bed and ran over to Tommy. Wake up, Tommy," pulling him by the arm. "Wake up, and let's go and see what that funny girl is doing with the big shoes." Tommy was wide awake in an instant. "I knew, even while I was sleeping, that something was going to happen today that was exciting, but I didn't remember what it was," he said, as he yanked off his pajama jacket. Off they went to the bathroom, washed themselves, and brushed their teeth much faster than usual, had their clothes on in a twinkling, and a whole hour before their mother expected them, they came sliding down the banister and landed at the breakfast table. Down they sat and announced that they wanted their hot chocolate right at that very moment. "What's going to happen today that you're in such a hurry?" asked their mother. "Oh, we're going to see that new girl next door," said Tommy. "And we may stay all day," said Annika. That morning, Pippi was busy making a kind of a Swedish cookie. She had made an enormous amount of dough, and she wrote it out on the kitchen floor. "Because," said Pippi to her little monkey, "what earthly use is a baking board when one plans to make at least 500 cookies?" And there she lay on the floor, cutting out cookie hearts for dear life. "Stop climbing around in the dough, Mr. Nelson," she said crossly, just as the doorbell rang. Pippi ran and opened the door. She was white as a miller from top to toe, and when she shook hands heartily with Tommy and Annika, a whole cloud of flour blew over them. So nice you called, she said, and shook her apron. So there came another cloud of flour. Tommy and Annika got so much flour in their throats that they could not help coughing. What are you doing? Asked Tommy. Well, if I say I'm sweeping the chimney, you won't believe me. You're so clever, said Pippi. The fact is, I'm baking, but I'll soon be done. You can sit on the wood box for a while. Pippi could work fast, she could. Tommy and Annika sat and watched how she went through the dough, how she threw the cookies onto the cookie pans, swung the pans into the oven, and they thought it was as good as a circus. Done, said Pippi at last, and shut the oven door on the last pans with a bang. What are we going to do now? Asked Tommy. I don't know what you're going to do, said Pippi, but I know I can't lie around and be lazy. I'm a thing finder, and when you're a thing finder, you don't have a minute to spare. What did you say you are? Asked Annika. I'm a thing finder. What's that? Asked Tommy. Somebody who hunts for things, naturally. What else could it be? Asked Pippi as she swept all the flour left on the floor into a little pile. The whole world is full of things, and somebody has to look for them, and that's just what a thing finder does, she finished. What kind of things? Asked Annika. Oh, all kinds, said Pippi. Lumps of gold, ostrich feathers, dead rats, candy, snap crackers, little tiny screws, things like that. Tommy and Annika thought it sounded as if it would be fun and wanted very much to be a thing finder too, although Tommy did say he hoped he'd find a lump of gold and not a little tiny screw. We shall see what we shall see, said Pippi. One always finds something, but we've got to hurry up and get going so that other thing finders won't pick up all the lumps of gold around here before we get to them. All three thing finders now set out. They decided it would be best to begin hunting around the houses in the neighborhood because Pippi said, although it could be willing happen that one might find a little screw deep in the woods, still the very best things were usually found where people were living. Though for that matter, she said, I've seen it the other way around. I remember once when I was out hunting for things in the jungles of Bararo, right in the heart of the forest where no human being had ever before set foot. What do you suppose I found? Why, a very fine wooden leg. I gave it away later to a one-legged old man, and he said that the wooden leg like that wasn't to be had for love or money. Tommy and Annika looked at Pippi to see just how a thing finder acted. Pippi ran from one side of the road to the other, shaded her eyes with her hand, and hunted and hunted. Sometimes she crawled about on her hands and knees, stuck her hands in between the pickets of a fence, and then said in a disappointed tone, Oh dear, I was sure I saw a lump of gold. May we really take everything we find? Asked Annika. Yes, everything that's lying on the ground, said Pippi. Presently they came to an old man lying asleep on the lawn outside his cottage. There, said Pippi, that man is lying on the ground, and we have found him, and we are going to take him. Tommy and Annika were utterly horrified. Oh, no, 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 Pippi, we can't take an old gentleman. We couldn't possibly, said Tommy. Anyway, what will we do with him? What will we do with him? Oh, there are plenty of things we could do with him. We could keep him in a little rabbit hutch instead of a rabbit and feed him on dandelions. But if you don't want to, I don't care. Though it does bother me to think that some other thing finder may come along and grab it. They went on. Suddenly, Pippi gave a terrific yell. Well, I never saw the like, she cried as she picked up a large, rusty old tin can from the grass. What a fine cans. That's something you can never have too many of. Tommy looked at the can doubtfully. What can you use it for? Oh, you can use it all sorts of ways, said Pippi. One way is to put cookies in it, and then it becomes a delightful jar with cookies. Another way is not to put cookies in it, and then it becomes a jar with cookies. That certainly isn't quite so delightful, but still that's good too. She examined the can, which was indeed rusty and had a hole in the bottom. It looks almost as if this were a jar without cookies, she said thoughtfully, but you can put it over your head and pretend it's midnight. And that's just what she did. With the can on her head, she wandered around the block like a little metal tower and never stopped until she stumbled over a low wire fence and fell flat on her stomach. There was a big crash when the tin can hit the ground. Now see that, said Pippi, and took off the can. If I hadn't had this thing on, I'd have fallen flat on my face and hurt myself terribly. Yes, said Annika, but if you hadn't had the can on your head, then you wouldn't have tripped on the wire in the first place. Before she'd finished speaking, there was another triumphant cry from Pippi, who was holding up an empty spool of thread. This seems to be my lucky day, she said. Such a sweet, sweet little spool to blow soap bubbles with, or to hang around my neck for a necklace. I'll go home and make one this very minute. However, just at that moment, the gate of one of the cottages nearby opened, and a boy came rushing out. He looked scared, and that was no wonder, because head over heels after him came 5 other boys. They soon caught him, and they pushed him against the fence, and all 5 began to punch and hit him. He cried, and he held his arms in front of his face to protect himself. Give it to him, cried the oldest and strongest of the boys. He'll never dare to show himself on this street again. Oh, said Annika, it's Willie that they're hurting. Oh, how can they be so mean? It's that Offenbengit. He's always in a fight, said Tommy. And 5 against 1? What cowards. Pippi went up to the boys and tapped Bengit on the back with her forefinger. Hello there, she said. What's the idea? Are you trying to make hash of little Willie with all 5 of you jumping on him at once? Then turned around and saw a little girl he had never seen before, a wild-looking little stranger who dared to touch him. For a while he stood and gaped at her in astonishment, and then a broad grin crept over his face. Boys, he said, boys, let Willie alone and take a look at this girl. What a babe. He slapped his knees and laughed, and in an instant they had all flocked around Pippi, all except Willie, who wiped away his tears and walked cautiously over to stand beside Tommy. Have you ever seen hair like hers, red as fire? And such shoes, he continued. Can't I borrow one? I'd like to go rowing, and I haven't any boat. And he took hold of one of Pippi's braids, but dropped it instantly and cried, ouch, I burned myself. Then all 5 boys joined hands around Pippi, jumping up and down and screaming, redhead, redhead. Pippi stood in the middle of the ring and smiled in the friendliest way. Ben had hoped she would get mad and begin to cry. At least she ought to have looked scared. When nothing happened, he gave her a push. I don't think you have a very nice way with ladies, said Pippi, and she lifted him in her strong arms high in the air and carried him to a birch tree and hung him over a branch. And then she took the next boy and she hung him over another branch. And the next one she set on a gate post outside of a cottage. And the next she threw right over the fence, so he landed in a flower bed. The last of the fighters she put in a tiny toy cart that stood by the road. And then Pippi, Tommy, Annika, and Willie stood, and they looked at the boys for a while. The boys were absolutely speechless with fear. And Pippi said, you are cowards. 5 of you attacking one boy. That's cowardly. Then you begin to push a helpless little girl around. Oh, how mean you are. Come now, we'll go home, she said to Tommy and Annika. And to Willie, if they try to hurt you again, you come and tell me. And to Bing, who sat in the tree and didn't dare to stir, she said, is there anything else you have to say about my hair or my shoes? If so, you'd better say it now before I go home. But Bing had nothing more to say about Pippi's shoes or about her hair either. So Pippi took her can in one hand, her spool in the other, and went away, followed by Tommy and Annika. When they were back home in Pippi's garden, Pippi said, oh, dear me, how awful. Here I found 2 beautiful things, and you didn't get anything. You must hunt a little more. Tommy, why don't you look in that old hollow tree? Old trees are usually about the best places of all for thing finders. Tommy said he didn't believe he and Annika would ever find anything, but to please Pippi, he put his hand slowly down into the hollow tree trunk. Goodness, he cried, utterly amazed, and pulled out his hand. In it he held a little tiny notebook with a leather cover. In a special loop, there was a little silver pencil. Well, that's queer, said Tommy. Now let's see that, said Pippi. There's nothing so nice as being a thing finder. It's a wonder there aren't more people that take it up. There'll be tailors and shoemakers and chimney sweeps and such like, but thing finders, no indeed. It isn't good enough for them. And then she said to Annika, why don't you feel in that old tree stump? One practically always finds things in old tree stumps. Annika stuck her hand down into the stump and almost immediately got hold of a red coral necklace. She and Tommy stood open mouthed for a long time. They were so astonished. They thought that hereafter they would be thing finders every single day. Pippi had been up half the night before playing ball, and now she suddenly felt sleepy. Ah, I think I'll have to go in and take a nap, she said. Can't you come with me and tuck me in? When Pippi was sitting on the edge of her bed, taking off her shoes, she looked at them thoughtfully and said, he was going out rowing. That old Bing, she snorted disdainfully. I'll teach him how to row. Indeed I will. Another time. Say, Pippi, said Tommy respectfully, why do you wear such big shoes? So I can wiggle my toes, of course, she answered. And then she crept into bed. She always slept with her feet on the pillow and her head way down under the quilt. That's the way they sleep in Guatemala, she announced. And it's the only real way to sleep. See, like this, I can wiggle my toes when I'm sleeping too. Can you go to sleep without a lullaby, she went on? I always have to sing to myself for a while, otherwise I can't sleep a wink. Tommy and Annika heard a humming sound under the quilt. It was Pippi singing herself to sleep. Quietly and cautiously, they tiptoed out so they would not disturb her. In the doorway, they turned to take a last look towards the bed. They could see nothing of Pippi except her feet resting on the pillow. There she lay, wiggling her toes emphatically. Tommy and Annika ran home. Annika held her coral necklace tightly in her hand. That certainly was strange, she said. Tommy, you don't suppose, do you suppose, really, that Pippi had put those things in place beforehand? You can never tell, said Tommy. You can just never tell anything when it comes to Pippi. And there's a picture of them hunting in the tree stump and in the tree. Okay. I'm going to put that story aside and we're going to read about Mr. Rabbit and the lovely present because we're getting into Halloween. It's a very magical time. So who knows, maybe somebody will come dressed like a rabbit. And because it was our daughter's birthday, which is why we're in Connecticut, I thought this would be a good story about trying to find the perfect present, okay, for someone that you love. And there's the rabbit and there's the little girl. And they're both trying to decide what to do. Mr. Rabbit, said the little girl, I want help. Help, little girl? I'll give you help if I can, said Mr. Rabbit. Mr. Rabbit, said the little girl, it's about my mother. Your mother? Said Mr. Rabbit. It's her birthday, said the little girl. Happy birthday to her then, said Mr. Rabbit. What are you giving her? Yeah. Fun to have a talking rabbit next door, huh? That's just it, said the little girl. That's why I want help. I have nothing to give her. Nothing to give your mother on her birthday, said Mr. Rabbit. Little girl, you really do want help. I would like to give her something she likes, said the little girl. Well, something she likes is a good present, said Mr. Rabbit. And there they are. I think he's helping her over the truck. But what, said the little girl. Yes, what, said Mr. Rabbit. Oh, she likes red, said the little girl. Red, well, you can't give her red. Something red, maybe, said the little girl. Oh, something red, said Mr. Rabbit. What is red, said the little girl. Well, said Rabbit, there's red underwear. No, I can't give her that, said the little girl. Well, there are red roofs, said Mr. Rabbit. Well, no, we have a roof, said the little girl. I don't want to give her that. There are red birds, said Mr. Rabbit, red cardinals. No, said the little girl. She likes birds and the tree. And there's the red roof. The rabbit has adjusted. Oh, there are red fire engines, said Mr. Rabbit. No, she doesn't like red fire engines. Well, said Mr. Rabbit, there are apples. Good, said the little girl. That's good. She likes apples. But I need something else. Well, what else does she like, said Mr. Rabbit. She likes yellow. Yellow, said Mr. Rabbit. You can't give her yellow. Something yellow, then maybe? Oh, something yellow. What is yellow? Asked the little girl. And there they're going through the woods. And I think they're eating one of those apples. Something yellow. Well, said Mr. Rabbit, there are yellow taxi cabs. Oh, I'm sure she doesn't want a taxi cab. The sun is yellow, said Mr. Rabbit, but I can't give her the sun, though I would if I could. A canary bird is yellow. Oh, but she likes birds and trees, said the little girl. And Mr. Rabbit is scratching his head. He has just run out of suggestions. Well, that's right. You told me, said Mr. Rabbit. Butter is yellow. Does she like butter? We have butter, said the little girl. Bananas are yellow, said Mr. Rabbit. Oh, good. That is good, good, good. She likes bananas. But I need something else. And they're beginning to collect things on the little tablecloth in the woods. So they have an apple, they have a banana. What else does she like? Said Mr. Rabbit. She likes green, said the little girl. Green, said Mr. Rabbit. You can't give her green. Something green, maybe? Emeralds, said the rabbit. Emeralds make a lovely gift. Well, I can't afford an emerald. Parrots are green, said Mr. Rabbit. I know. She likes birds in the trees. Yes, she does, up in the trees. And parrots won't do. And then what can we give her that could be green? Peas and spinach, said Mr. Rabbit. Peas are green. Spinach is green. Oh, no, said the little girl. We have those for dinner all the time. Caterpillars, said Mr. Rabbit. Some of them are very green. She doesn't care for caterpillars, the little girl said. How about pears, said Mr. Rabbit. Bartlett pears. The very thing, said the little girl. The very thing. Now I have apples, bananas, and pears. But I need something else. Here they are picking the pears. Oh, well, what else does she like, said Mr. Rabbit. She likes blue, the little girl said. Blue? You can't give her blue. Something blue, maybe, said the little girl. Lakes are blue, said the rabbit. But I can't give her the lakes, said the little girl. Stars are blue. I can't give her stars, but I would if I could. Sapphires. Sapphires make a lovely gift, said Mr. Rabbit. But I can't afford sapphires either. Bluebirds are blue. I know, but she likes birds staying in the trees, said Mr. Rabbit. Right, said the little girl. How about blue grapes, said the rabbit. And there they go, over the little bridge, over the water, carrying the grapes. Yes, said the little girl. That is good. That is very good. She likes grapes. Now I have apples and pears, bananas and grapes. Well, that makes a good gift, said Mr. Rabbit. All you need now is a basket. And I have a basket, said the little girl. So she took her basket and she filled it with green pears, yellow bananas, red apples, and blue grapes. And it made a lovely present. I think that is the end of our story. And we turn the last page. Thank you for your help, Mr. Rabbit, said the little girl. Not at all, said Mr. Rabbit. Very glad to help. Goodbye now, said the little girl. Goodbye, said Mr. Rabbit, and a happy birthday and a happy basket of fruit to your mother. And there he goes, the magical rabbit. The end of the story. And